Feeling upset is something every person experiences, but for someone who walks a spiritually elevated path, their frustration carries an entirely different dimension. The presence of such an individual holds extraordinary significance. Their emotional state can transform environments, touch the depths of others' souls, and create effects that seem beyond rational explanation. This explains why those on spiritual journeys must protect their inner peace and maintain composure when facing challenges. When their emotional balance tips, the consequences extend far beyond a simple emotional release. The result resembles a seismic shift in the spiritual realm that influences everything in its vicinity. If these words have found their way to you at this particular moment, there's likely a deeper reason behind it. You are destined to receive this message. Before we continue exploring this topic, I would greatly appreciate if you would consider subscribing to this channel and becoming part of our community dedicated to exploring profound spiritual insights. And if you sense that this content has arrived precisely when you most needed to hear it, please share the numbers 1111 in the comments section as a symbol of divine favor, spiritual harmony, and protective guidance. Now, let's explore the 9 profound consequences that can unfold when a spiritually elevated person experiences intense frustration, and understand why this can set off a cascade of uncontrollable events. First, their speech becomes powerfully impactful. When a spiritually elevated person expresses themselves during moments of frustration, their words possess an intensity that transcends normal conversation. Different from everyday individuals, such a person's voice represents more than mere vocalization. It embodies spiritual influence, granted through divine connection. When their feelings intensify, that influence becomes magnified, and even without any intention to cause pain, their statements penetrate deeply into the consciousness of their listeners. A single phrase uttered during emotional distress can completely undermine someone's self-assurance, bring concealed matters to light, or unveil realities that individuals weren't prepared to confront. Statements that might seem unremarkable coming from someone else transform into piercing instruments when spoken by a spiritually elevated soul, cutting through protective layers of ego, refusal to accept reality, and even dishonesty. This phenomenon occurs because these individuals carry the responsibility of conveying truth, and truth delivered through emotional intensity strikes with greater force than falsehoods shared with calculated calmness. Consider this scenario. During a heated exchange, a spiritually elevated person might declare to someone, "Our connection isn't genuine friendship," while others might perceive this as merely an offensive remark or impulsive statement. When this particular individual makes such a declaration, the words may not only illuminate the authentic nature of their relationship, but also plant deep seeds of self-reflection in the recipient's consciousness, prompting them to recognize the facade they've been maintaining. The intention isn't always to inflict emotional wounds, but their authentic expression, when intensified by frustration, becomes like purifying flames that consume anything artificial or false. This explains why people frequently carry the memory of what a spiritually elevated person said to them for many years afterward. The resonance of their statements continues echoing, replaying in consciousness like prophetic declarations, because their words carry genuine power. Once articulated, these words cannot be withdrawn or erased, and they create a lasting impression on the innermost being. Second, their presence immediately transforms the atmosphere. When a spiritually elevated individual experiences frustration, they don't require raised voices, forceful gestures, or dramatic displays, for others to recognize that something fundamental has changed. Their energetic presence alone carries substantial weight, and when it becomes disturbed, the effect moves through the surrounding space like an invisible tempest. People in close proximity might suddenly experience inner restlessness. Interactions become strained and uncomfortable, and even the most self-assured individuals begin faltering in their communication or deliberately avoiding direct visual contact. The consciousness of a spiritually elevated person maintains deep connections with dimensions beyond ordinary perception, and when it experiences agitation, the vibrations it generates can be sensed by everyone in their vicinity. Whether people consciously comprehend it or not, the experience resembles silent reverberations moving through the environment, creating pressure that seems to settle upon the chest and makes natural breathing feel more labored. The spiritually elevated person doesn't consciously attempt to produce this phenomenon. It manifests naturally because their inner being holds such potency, and their emotional disturbance releases a surge of energetic frequency into their surroundings. Picture the electrical charge that fills the atmosphere during a powerful storm. That's comparable to how their presence feels when their emotional state becomes stirred. Even creatures in the animal kingdom may behave unusually in their vicinity, detecting the alteration in energetic vibration. This reality explains why many spiritually elevated individuals work diligently to cultivate mastery over their emotional responses, understanding that a single instance of frustration possesses the capacity to disturb an entire household, professional environment, or social gathering. Their energetic presence, whether tranquil or agitated, establishes the overall tone of their surroundings, and when it experiences disruption, everyone present feels the tempest brewing within them. Third, concealed opposition emerges into the open. When a spiritually elevated person experiences intense frustration, something remarkable occurs. Individuals who secretly harbored resentment toward them or wished them difficulty begin displaying their authentic character. Frustration for such a person functions like flames that force hidden serpents from their concealed positions. People who previously displayed friendly faces suddenly make mistakes that allow their genuine feelings to emerge through careless statements, subtly aggressive remarks, or even direct confrontations. The emotional intensity shakes the foundations, and those who were performing roles can no longer maintain their disguises. This represents one of the methods through which divine wisdom utilizes the emotions of spiritually elevated individuals as instruments for revelation. What remained, concealed in shadows, becomes exposed in the illumination of conflict. For instance, someone who has been quietly envious of the spiritually elevated person's achievements might suddenly ridicule them during a tense moment, revealing the jealousy they attempted to disguise with false encouragement. A supposed friend who never genuinely supported their well-being might finally express, "I harbored negative feelings toward you all along." When tension escalates, these admissions aren't coincidental occurrences. They represent spiritual unveilings. Frustration from a spiritually elevated person creates pressure upon the hearts of others until their authentic intentions surface. This can certainly cause emotional pain because it frequently means releasing relationships that appeared solid and reliable, but it simultaneously represents a blessing. It liberates the spiritually elevated person from being encircled by hidden adversaries and provides them with absolute clarity regarding who genuinely stands with them and who harbored opposition from the beginning. In this manner, their frustration serves as a purifying force. It doesn't merely destroy existing structures. It uncovers hidden realities. It brings truth to light. It compels authenticity to stand completely exposed before them. This explains why spiritually elevated individuals often reflect, "When I experienced intense frustration, I finally perceived people's authentic nature." Fourth, they can irreparably damage connections without planning. To spiritually elevated individuals possess an uncommon directness when they communicate truth during emotional distress. Unlike most people who might soften their language or sidestep confrontation, a spiritually elevated person's frustration often compels them to reveal reality exactly as it exists without diplomatic cushioning or negotiation. When they feel wounded or frustrated, they articulate raw truth, truth that can pierce like a projectile through the core of relationships. Friendships constructed upon partial truths or superficial foundations can disintegrate during a single exchange. Romantic partnerships may dissolve under the burden of one unflinchingly honest revelation. Even long-standing alliances can be terminated by a handful of words that demolish illusions and bring buried concerns into clear view. This doesn't occur because the spiritually elevated person desires destruction, but because they cannot engage in deception when their inner being becomes activated. Frustration eliminates the protective filters, and the words they articulate in that condition carry the accumulated weight of years of unvoiced observations. They might verbalize something in the intensity of the moment that others never anticipated them noticing. Insights about people's character traits, behavioral patterns, or hidden motivations. Once articulated, these truths cannot be retracted, and they permanently transform the way others perceive themselves and the spiritually elevated person. The most devastating aspect is that the spiritually elevated person may not even comprehend how conclusive their words sound. For them, it might simply represent releasing pent-up frustration. But for the person receiving those words, it feels simultaneously like a judgment, a revelation, and a complete severing of bonds. This explains why relationships with spiritually elevated individuals can feel so intense. Their frustration doesn't simply pass like a temporary storm. It possesses the capacity to leave the entire landscape permanently altered. Fifth, their quietness becomes profoundly unsettling. Not every spiritually elevated person manifests frustration through vocal expressions or dramatic outbursts. In reality, some of the most powerful expressions of their inner turmoil emerge through silence. When a spiritually elevated person retreats into quietness during emotional distress, that stillness becomes overwhelming in its intensity. It carries substantial spiritual weight that can create deep discomfort in others. Those in their vicinity may experience the tension without any verbal communication, as though an invisible storm is accumulating in the atmosphere. Their silence doesn't represent absence or emptiness. It represents energy held back, restrained, and concentrated in ways that feel almost unbearable for those nearby. Silence from a spiritually elevated person creates more impact than shouting because it leaves people speculating, questioning, and feeling vulnerable to examination. It generates an atmosphere where everyone wonders what is transpiring within the spiritually elevated person's consciousness. This quietness can feel like unspoken judgment, like undeclared truth, pressing against invisible barriers, waiting to burst forth with tremendous force. It can also generate feelings of guilt in those who recognize they have caused harm to the spiritually elevated person, because the silence feels like a reflective surface showing their actions back to them. This form of emotional response is particularly powerful because it allows energy to accumulate within the spiritually elevated person, and when finally released, it can prove even more impactful than verbal expressions. Sometimes the silence itself functions as the consequence, because those who have grown accustomed to their warmth, generosity, and engaging interaction suddenly experience the cold withdrawal of their energetic presence. It creates disturbance in people because they recognize the spiritually elevated person is no longer granting them access to their spiritual energy. This particular form of silence affects people more profoundly than raised voices ever could. It feels like a spiritual storm suspended in the atmosphere, poised to strike. Sixth, they unintentionally influence circumstances negatively. When a spiritually elevated person becomes overwhelmed with frustration, their thoughts alone can begin shaping reality in ways they never consciously intended. This occurs because spiritually elevated individuals maintain powerful spiritual connections, and their energetic frequency manifests outcomes with remarkable speed. What they feel and contemplate carries significant weight in dimensions beyond ordinary perception. If during their frustration they momentarily wish someone difficulty, even briefly, circumstances in that person's life may begin deteriorating. The spiritually elevated person doesn't need to vocalize it. Their consciousness communicates directly with the surrounding atmosphere, and pathways to misfortune may open for those connected to their emotional distress. This reality explains why spiritually elevated individuals must exercise extreme caution during moments of frustration. Their emotions aren't ordinary in nature. They become amplified through their divine assignment and spiritual responsibility. A passing thought such as, "I hope they experience hardship," can transform into tangible consequences. Sometimes days or weeks later, they discover that the person who caused them pain lost their employment, encountered health challenges, or experienced unfortunate circumstances, and they realize these events coincided with the moment they experienced intense rage. This doesn't always bring them a sense of satisfaction or vindication. Instead, it often humbles and genuinely frightens them. It demonstrates to them how powerful their spiritual essence is and why divine guidance warns them to protect their inner emotional state. The energetic field of a spiritually elevated person is like exceptionally fertile ground. Whatever seed of thought they plant, whether rooted in love or frustration, quickly establishes roots and flourishes. Their emotions function as powerful magnets that attract corresponding results, whether positive or negative. This explains why their frustration carries such danger. It's not merely an emotional reaction to circumstances. It represents a spiritual force that can fundamentally alter the trajectory of events in ways they never planned or desired. Seventh, they draw unwanted spiritual conflicts. Frustration for a spiritually elevated person isn't merely an emotional condition. It represents an opening or portal. When they lose their inner calm, it can attract unnecessary warfare in both physical reality and spiritual dimensions. Arguments may suddenly erupt in their vicinity. Conflicts they never sought may find them, and unusual attacks may emerge from unexpected sources. It almost seems as though opposing forces wait specifically for that single moment of vulnerability to initiate an assault. Their frustration becomes like a signal beacon that attracts spiritual opposition, because negative forces recognize their power is most formidable when they maintain inner peace. This explains why spiritually elevated individuals often find themselves engulfed in chaos following emotional outbursts. They might engage in an argument with a loved one, only to subsequently face unexpected challenges like accidents, financial difficulties, or sudden illness. The energetic frequency of frustration lowers their spiritual protection, making them more susceptible to various forms of attack. Darkness feeds upon unrest and disturbance, and frustration provides the perfect entry point for spiritual disruption. But even within this challenge, there exists an important lesson. Spiritually elevated individuals learn through direct experience that maintaining peace isn't simply about avoiding conflict with other people. It concerns protecting their spiritual essence from unnecessary warfare. They come to recognize that their emotions function as spiritual weapons, and if they are careless in their use, those weapons can be redirected against them. This explains why spiritual texts often emphasize that uncontrolled frustration gives opposing forces a foothold or entry point. For the spiritually elevated person, that foothold can rapidly transform into a full battleground. Their frustration, though sometimes justified by circumstances, can invite storms they didn't need to confront. Eighth, their abilities become unpredictable. Spiritually elevated individuals are born with spiritual authority and influence. Their words possess the capacity to heal, inspire, comfort, and uplift others. Their presence can calm turbulent situations. Their prayers can open previously closed doors, and their love can bring restoration to damaged hearts. But when frustration assumes control, this power becomes unstable, unpredictable, and even destructive in nature. The same voice that once blessed others now inflicts wounds. The same presence that once provided comfort now generates fear. The same energy that once built people up can suddenly tear them down. This instability creates danger not only for those in their vicinity, but also for the spiritually elevated person themselves. They are called to serve as vessels of illumination, but in moments of rage, their light flickers and diminishes while darkness seeps through the cracks. They may articulate words they subsequently regret, or release energy that causes harm instead of facilitating healing. Because their spiritual essence is so highly charged, even small bursts of frustration can generate massive effects, much like a lightning strike that destroys everything it touches. This explains why spiritually elevated individuals often feel drained and burdened after moments of rage. Their frustration consumes their power in ways they cannot control, scattering it chaotically instead of channeling it purposefully. Instead of functioning as a fountain of life-giving energy, they feel like a destructive storm that caused devastation. Yet within this difficult experience, they learn the immense value of discipline and self-mastery. They come to realize their calling requires complete mastery over emotional responses, because their power is too substantial to be wasted in chaos and disorder. Stability is absolutely essential. Without it, their gift becomes a double-edged sword that cuts both ways. Ninth, they astonish people with their complete transformation. Spiritually elevated individuals are frequently recognized for being patient, quiet, forgiving, and kind-hearted. They are the ones people feel protected around, the ones who grant endless opportunities for redemption, who maintain composure when others lose control. Because of this consistent pattern, people sometimes underestimate their true nature. They assume the spiritually elevated person will always tolerate disrespect, betrayal, or mistreatment indefinitely. But when the spiritually elevated person finally reaches their breaking point, the transformation is absolutely shocking to witness. It resembles observing a lion release a thunderous roar after mistaking it for a gentle lamb. Everyone who thought they could disregard boundaries or show disrespect is suddenly confronted with an aspect they never imagined existed. The shift is terrifying because it's not simply human frustration manifesting. It represents divine authority rising to the surface. The spiritually elevated person usually gentle in their speech, suddenly communicates with a power that silences the entire environment. Their facial expression changes dramatically. Their eyes blaze with intensity, and their presence demands immediate respect. Those who once laughed at their expense or dismissed them as weak are forced to acknowledge their true strength. It shocks people into recognizing the spiritually elevated person is not to be taken lightly. This transformation commands instant respect and often generates genuine fear. It permanently changes how people perceive them. Once someone has witnessed the spiritually elevated person in their full intensity, they understand that patience should never be confused with weakness. It serves as a reminder that kindness is a conscious choice, not an obligation or requirement, and that behind the calm exterior resides a warrior spirit capable of shaking foundations. That revelation often prevents people from ever crossing boundaries again, because they now understand the spiritually elevated person is not merely gentle, they are genuinely powerful. The frustration of a spiritually elevated person is not ordinary in nature. It's amplified, spiritual in essence, and uncontrollable once fully unleashed. That's precisely why spiritually elevated individuals must develop mastery over self-control and remain grounded in prayer, wisdom, and patience. Their power is too substantial to be wasted on temporary emotional reactions. This is the Chosen Seer channel. If this message resonated with your spiritual understanding, please don't forget to subscribe and stay connected with our community. And if you recognize this message reached you at the perfect moment, please share the numbers 1111 in the comment section for divine blessings and spiritual alignment. Thank you for watching.